24 hours in solitary confinement, what really happens behind that door? 24 hours in solitary. Before we start, hit subscribe if you're brave enough to walk through this story. What happens behind this door is darker than most people ever hear about. The camera would fade into a narrow, dimly lit corridor. Paint peeling. Air heavy. Somewhere in the distance, a metal door slams with the finality of a gunshot. This is the solitary unit at Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola. The place where time doesn't just slow, it suffocates. For decades, one inmate's name haunted these halls, Albert Woodfox. He was locked in solitary confinement for longer than any other man in modern American history. Not days. Not months. Not even years. Decades. His story, documented by attorneys, journalists, and federal investigations, remains one of the most chilling examples of how isolation can unravel the human mind. But in this chapter, we are not looking at his entire 4 decades. We are looking at just 24 hours, the kind of day that breaks men long before the calendar pages do. The door shuts at 6:03 a.m. A guard's boots echo down the hallway, then fade into silence. Inside the 6x9 cell, the world compresses into concrete, steel, and the deafening hum of fluorescent lights. For Woodfox, it begins like every other day: a thin mattress, a stainless steel toilet, and a slot in the door barely wide enough for a tray. The cold hits first. Prison reports confirm that solitary cells often ran freezing, even in summer. But it's not the temperature that crushes a man. It's the silence. A silence so absolute that it begins to sound like static ringing in the ears. Throughout the morning, he paces. 10 steps forward. 10 steps back. Over and over, because it's the only form of movement allowed. Investigators who later reviewed solitary confinement conditions described this repetitive pacing as a survival mechanism. Without it, the hours blur, and the mind follows. But this wasn't just isolation. It was punishment layered on a disputed accusation. Woodfox was placed in solitary for the 1972 killing of a corrections officer, though decades of appeals, recanted testimony, and investigative reporting would later show how deeply flawed the case became. Whether the state believed he was dangerous or simply wanted him forgotten, one fact remained: he stayed in that cell for more than 40 years. Around noon, a guard slides a tray through the slot. Beans, rice, and cornbread. The same meals documented in lawsuits about dietary monotony. Food that's delivered without human contact. Woodfox often said that the absence of touch was worse than hunger. Worst of all, he heard things: footsteps that weren't there, voices that vanished as soon as he focused. These weren't hallucinations. They were the tricks of an overstimulated, starving mind. That afternoon, something changes. 2 investigators from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division arrive unannounced. Angola had been under scrutiny for years: accusations of excessive force, corruption, and systematic overuse of isolation. Today, they want to inspect the solitary unit. Word spreads down the tier like a whisper from cell to cell. When the investigators reach Woodfox's door, they pause longer than expected. They ask questions, detailed ones, about the length of his confinement, the conditions, and the documentation officers kept. Their voices are low, tense. A guard nearby stiffens, jaw tightening, as if he already senses trouble. Then comes the moment that sets the rest of this story in motion. One investigator asks to review the solitary assignment log, the official record that shows why each inmate was placed in isolation and for how long. The guard disappears into the office. Minutes pass. 10. 15. He returns pale. "The file's missing," he mutters. The investigators exchange a look. A long, loaded one. Because files don't just disappear in a prison where movement is monitored, recorded, and logged by the minute. And when they step into the office to verify it themselves, they find something else missing too. The evidence locker seal has been broken. And whatever was inside, the documents that could have explained why one man spent a lifetime alone, has vanished. The missing file. The investigators didn't speak at first. They just stood there, staring at the broken seal on the metal evidence locker as the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Dust clung to the hinge, but the lock, normally checked every shift, hung cracked open like someone had pried it apart with a crowbar. In a prison where every door, every drawer, and every movement was controlled, the message was unmistakable: someone wanted something to disappear, and they wanted it gone fast. Inside the administrative office, the air felt thicker. A sergeant hovered near the doorway, hands behind his back, avoiding eye contact. On paper, this visit was routine oversight. Angola had been scrutinized many times before: lawsuits, federal reports, media investigations. But this was different. The investigators weren't here for general conditions. They came specifically with a list of inmates whose solitary confinement lengths raised serious constitutional questions. Albert Woodfox's name had been circled. The older investigator, Reeves, knelt beside the locker. "Who else has access to this room?" he asked quietly. The sergeant swallowed. "Just ranking officers. Shift captains. Warden's staff. Anyone on medical leave? Suspended? Recently transferred?" Reeves pressed. The sergeant shook his head, but his voice betrayed him. "No, not that I know of." The tension was rising, creeping across the floor like smoke. Outside the office, Woodfox remained in his cell, unaware of the confrontation unfolding just a few yards from his door. But he felt something shifting. Solitary heightens the senses. Every vibration, every distant murmur becomes part of the internal landscape. He stopped pacing. Pressed his ear against the cold steel. Something was happening. Meanwhile, the second investigator, Daniels, opened the locker slowly. Inside were only a few scattered envelopes and outdated disciplinary reports. Nothing substantial. Nothing that justified a broken seal. And certainly none of the documentation that should have accompanied one of the longest solitary cases in modern U.S. history. Reeves stood up, brushing dust off his suit pants. "Sergeant, logs don't vanish unless someone wants them gone." The sergeant's eyes flickered. "Sir, with respect, maybe it was misfiled." Daniels turned sharply. "A file spanning 40 years of solitary review reports. Misfiled?" He stepped closer. "Let's not insult each other." The sergeant went pale. Outside the office, a young guard named Lewis lingered near the hallway, pretending to check keys but clearly listening in. His hands trembled. He kept glancing toward the tier like he was waiting for someone to appear. "Anyone?" At 1:47 p.m., a loud bang echoed through the corridor. A door slamming. Heavy footsteps. Then the unmistakable voice of Warden McConnell, a man whose reputation inside the prison system carried an edge sharp enough to silence conversations. His stride cut through the hallway with military precision. "Gentlemen," he said, stepping into the office with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hear we've got a misunderstanding." Reeves didn't flinch. "We need the solitary assignment log for inmate Woodfox. It's missing." The warden's expression didn't change, but something tightened around his jaw. "Record keeping goes back decades. Things get old. Damaged. Lost. You know how state facilities are." Daniels stepped forward. "Then why is the evidence locker broken?" For the first time, the warden's smile disappeared. "That locker was damaged weeks ago," he said. "Work orders pending." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Your sergeant claims it was intact yesterday." Silence. The warden's eyes flicked toward the sergeant, who stared at the ground, sweat pooling at his temples. Something unspoken passed between them, something that made Lewis, watching from the hallway, take a step back. Reeves pulled a small notebook from his coat. "Warden, we will be requesting full internal surveillance from the last 72 hours. Every entrance. Every office. Every corridor." McConnell's face twitched. "We don't have cameras inside administrative rooms." "Then we'll need your staff logs," Daniels said. "Every officer who entered this unit since Monday." The warden's voice lowered. "You're reaching." "No," Reeves said calmly. We're investigating. Back in his cell, Woodfox heard footsteps returning down the hallway. More than one pair. Heavy. Purposeful. Something was unfolding, something that felt strangely familiar. In solitary, rumors traveled differently. Sometimes in quiet clues. Sometimes in tension you could taste in the air. At 2:06 p.m., just as the investigators turned to leave the office, Lewis, the young guard, spoke up. His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. "Sir, there's something you need to see." He swallowed. "It's about last night, and the cameras." Everyone froze. Even the warden stiffened. Lewis's face drained of color as he whispered the part that changed everything. Someone ordered the footage deleted. The last 24 hours. For a moment, no one breathed. The words hung in the air like a live wire. Someone ordered the footage deleted. Reeves stepped closer to Lewis. "Look at me," he said. "Who gave that order?" Lewis's eyes flicked toward the warden. McConnell didn't move, but the shadow crossing his face told the investigators everything they needed to know. Angola was a place where hierarchy ruled stronger than law. A place where silence wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. I can't say," Lewis whispered. Daniels softened his voice. "We're here for the truth, son. Not politics." Lewis swallowed hard. The deletion happened around 3 a.m. I was on camera rotation. The system flagged a manual overwrite request from an admin login. When I checked the file list, everything from midnight to 5 a.m. was wiped clean. Daniels and Reeves exchanged a grim look. Critical hours. The exact window where the missing solitary logs could have been removed. The warden stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. Guards make mistakes. Systems glitch. This is a prison, not the Pentagon." Reeves closed his notebook. "Then you won't mind if we interview every officer on the night shift?" The warden's voice sharpened. "My staff won't be harassed." "They will," Reeves said coldly, "if someone destroyed evidence." The tension snapped tight like barbed wire. Lewis instinctively stepped back as the warden's stare bore into him. Daniels noticed. He moved protectively between them. "We're done here," the warden muttered. "I'll notify legal counsel." But Daniels held up a hand. "We're not done until we understand why a man has been in solitary for more than 40 years without complete documentation." The warden left without another word, boots pounding down the corridor like blows on a drum. Inside his cell, Woodfox felt the shift. Solitary teaches you to read the world through vibrations, changes in tone, footsteps that say more than words. Today felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. At 3:11 p.m., the investigators returned to his door. Reeves spoke through the steel. "Mr. Woodfox. Do you know anyone who would want your logs removed?" Woodfox didn't answer immediately. Decades in isolation had taught him that words come with consequences. But then he stepped toward the slit in the door and spoke in a steady, measured voice. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "You should be asking who wanted me forgotten." Daniels leaned closer. "Why would someone try to bury your case?" Woodfox met his gaze through the narrow crack. "Because if you look too closely at why I'm here, you'll see more than one lie." The investigators exchanged a loaded glance. They had expected a man broken by solitude. Instead, they found someone sharper than most people outside those walls. As they turned to leave, Woodfox added quietly, "Check the transfer orders from 95. And 02. They never wanted me out of this cell." Reeves froze. "Why those years?" Woodfox looked down at his hands. "Because those were the years people tried." The investigators went straight to records. Reeves demanded every transfer request. Every review board decision. Every internal memo on Woodfox's housing status. Files were pulled. Boxes stacked. Papers flipped through at frantic speed. Then they found it. 2 transfer recommendations, both signed by medical and psychological staff citing severe risk of prolonged isolation. Both stamped with approval. Both overwritten by one name: Warden McConnell. Daniels slammed the file shut. He kept him here deliberately. For decades. Reeves exhaled sharply. And he deleted the footage to hide the missing logs. They had motive. They had pattern. They had a cover-up. But they didn't have proof. Not yet. At 7:42 p.m., as dusk settled over Angola's razor wire fences, Lewis approached the investigators again. Hands shaking. Voice trembling. "I didn't tell you everything," he said. The footage wasn't just deleted. He pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. "I recovered part of the overwrite buffer before it wiped." Reeves grabbed it. "What's on this?" Lewis's voice cracked. "A camera caught someone entering the office last night. I didn't see his face. But I know the walk. Everyone here knows it." Reeves leaned in. "Whose?" Lewis looked up, eyes full of fear. "The warden's." The investigators stared at each other. This was the missing piece, the one thing that could break everything open. Reeves put a hand on Lewis's shoulder. "You just changed this man's life." Lewis whispered, "Then you'd better move fast. Because if McConnell finds out, he'll bury that truth deeper than solitary ever did." That night, they issued an emergency federal order. Woodfox's case was reopened. The solitary file investigation expanded into a full civil rights probe. And the warden, for the first time in decades, was no longer untouchable. But the twist came 2 weeks later. When the investigators returned to Angola to proceed with the case, they received news that stopped them cold. Warden McConnell had resigned abruptly. Packed his office. Vanished. No forwarding address. No answer from state headquarters. No explanation. Just gone. And the most disturbing part? When they checked the surveillance logs for his departure, they discovered he left the prison at 3:17 a.m. The exact same minute, down to the second, that the overwritten footage had been timestamped. A perfect match. A final signature. One last act from a man who spent years controlling who was seen, and who was silenced. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, you don't want to miss what comes next.